The morning sun crept over the red ridges of Arizona, painting the sky in streaks of gold and fire. The land was wide, raw, and empty, a place where a man could live an entire life without hearing another soul's voice. For Caleb Turner, that was both a blessing and a punishment. He rose before dawn, as always. The small ranch he kept was modest. A single cabin built from rough-hewn logs, a corral, a barn that leaned slightly in the wind, and a few dozen head of cattle that grazed on whatever stubborn grass pushed through the desert soil. His hands were scarred and calloused. His beard was beginning to gray at the edges, though he was barely in his 30s. Life out here aged a man faster than he realized. As he stepped onto the porch, a cool breeze drifted through the mesquite trees, carrying the scent of sage and dust. He could hear the low murmur of the cattle, the creak of wood, the distant call of a hawk. The stillness was almost holy. Caleb liked it that way. He didn't talk much anymore, hadn't since the war. He had once worn the blue uniform of the U.S. Cavalry back when he was young and foolish enough to believe in glory. But what he found instead were ashes and screams. He still remembered the night fires rolling across an Apache village, the gunfire echoing off canyon walls, the faces of women and children, terrified, fleeing, then falling. The memory came to him sometimes in dreams, other times in the still light of morning, like a ghost that refused to fade. After he left the army, he drifted for years working odd jobs, breaking horses, driving cattle, sleeping under the stars. Eventually, he bought a patch of land no one wanted, built himself a cabin, and tried to forget. But forgetting wasn't easy when every shadow at dusk looked like a face from the past. Caleb's only companion was a black gelding named Copper. The horse had seen battles too and bore a long scar down its flank, just like its owner. When Caleb saddled him that morning to ride the perimeter fence, Copper snorted softly, as if sharing the same thought. They had both survived more than they should have. By mid-morning, the heat was rising, turning the air to waves above the dry earth. Caleb rode slowly, his rifle strapped across his saddle, his eyes scanning the horizon out of habit. Nothing ever came this way anymore. Not travelers, not traders, not even the law. The land had swallowed them all, just as it would one day swallow him. Still, there was a strange peace in it, the kind of peace that comes only to men who've seen too much noise. When he stopped to fix a broken section of fence, he caught himself humming an old tune his mother used to sing. The sound startled him. It had been years since he'd made music of any kind. By sunset, the cattle had settled, and the air turned cool again. Caleb sat on his porch, a tin cup of coffee in hand, watching the orange light fade behind the mountains. A coyote called somewhere in the distance. He thought of the men The storm rolled in without warning, like a beast awakening from the mountains. One moment, the desert sky was clear and endless. The next, thunder cracked across the horizon, and the wind began to howl through the mesquite. Caleb Turner had just finished securing the barn doors when the first heavy drops of rain fell, fat, cold, and relentless. Within minutes, the world turned gray and wild. He pulled his coat tighter and stepped onto the porch, squinting into the downpour. Storms like this were rare but unforgiving. The dry earth, cracked from months without rain, turned to mud in moments. The cattle huddled near the windbreak, lowing nervously. Caleb muttered a curse under his breath, grabbed a lantern, and made his way toward the barn to check the stock. The rain stung his face as he moved, his boots sinking into the soft ground. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the hills for an instant, and that was when he saw it. Movement. Something, or someone, darted past the edge of his vision near the corral. His hand instinctively went to his revolver, though he didn't draw it. Out here, a man couldn't afford to assume a shape in the dark was harmless. "Who's there?" he shouted over the wind. No answer. Only the rush of rain. He waited, scanning the shadows. Then, faintly, he heard it. A soft cry, muffled by the storm. He raised the lantern higher and moved toward the barn, his boots sloshing through puddles. Inside, the horses were restless, their eyes rolling white in the dim light. He set the lantern down on a barrel and turned toward the open doorway. That's when he saw them. Two figures stood just inside the threshold, young, drenched to the bone, trembling. One was tall and proud, her dark hair clinging to her face, eyes flashing with defiance even in fear. The other, smaller and fragile, clutched her sister's arm, her breath coming in shallow gasps. They looked half-starved, their clothes torn and caked with mud. Caleb froze. It took only a glance to recognize who they were, Apache. For a long moment, none of them moved. The storm outside raged, thunder rolling like the voice of judgment itself. Caleb's mind raced. The law was clear. Any white man caught harboring hostile Indians could be shot or hanged without trial. And yet, as he looked at the younger one shivering uncontrollably, something in him shifted, some buried instinct stronger than fear. "Come inside," he said gruffly. The older sister hesitated, her eyes narrowing. She stepped forward slightly, keeping her body between him and the girl. "No tricks," she warned, her voice low but steady. Caleb shook his head. "Ain't no tricks. You'll die out there." Another flash of lightning lit the sky. The younger one whimpered, clutching her sister's waist. That was enough. The tall one gave a curt nod, and together they stepped fully inside the barn. Caleb shut the doors against the storm and turned back toward them. He brought them an old blanket, gesturing toward a pile of hay near the wall. "Sit. You can dry off here." They obeyed, still watching him carefully. When he handed them a tin cup of water, the younger one took it eagerly. The older sister refused, suspicion burning in her gaze. Caleb didn't ask questions that night. He simply tended to the horses, then settled near the door with his rifle across his lap. The storm howled for hours, shaking the rafters. But when he glanced back, he saw the younger girl asleep beneath the blanket, her head on her sister's shoulder. The elder's eyes, however, remained open, sharp and wary in the lantern glow, fixed on the man who had chosen, against reason to let them live, and outside, under the pounding rain, the desert held its breath. Something had shifted in the lonely life of Caleb Turner. The storm had brought more than rain. It had brought a reckoning. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and strangely silent. Mist hung low over the desert floor, and the air smelled of wet earth and sage. Caleb Turner rose stiffly from his chair near the barn door, the rifle still resting across his knees. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, but his mind was sharper than ever. The two girls, no, women, he corrected himself, were still there. The older one was awake, sitting upright with her sister's head resting in her lap. The firelight flickered over her face, revealing strong cheekbones and eyes that held more sorrow than fear. She didn't speak as Caleb approached, though her gaze never left him. The younger one stirred, mumbling softly in Apache, her voice thin and tired. Caleb crouched near the fire, adding another piece of wood. The flame caught, crackling warmly. He didn't look at them when he spoke. "You got names?" For a moment, silence. Then, in accented but clear English, the older one replied, "Naya." She rested a hand on her sister's shoulder. "Tala," he nodded slowly. "I'm Caleb." She said nothing in return, and the quiet stretched between them. Caleb poured some water from his canteen into a tin cup and held it out. Tala accepted it with both hands, drinking greedily. Naya still watched him warily, her jaw tight. He couldn't blame her. After a time, he spoke again. "You running from someone?" That made her eyes flash. "White man," she said simply. Her voice was steady, but he heard the bitterness beneath it. "Traders, hunters, they came to our village for scalps." For money, Caleb froze. His gut twisted. He knew such things happened, had seen it himself, but hearing it from her lips was different. "My father fought," Naya continued quietly, staring into the fire. "My mother took Tala to hide. When we came back, there was nothing left, only fire and smoke. We walked for days." She swallowed hard. "We would have died last night." Caleb rubbed a hand over his face, unsure what to say. He had no comfort to give. The sins of his people weren't his alone, but they weighed heavy on him nonetheless. He finally managed, "You're safe here. For now." Naya's eyes darted toward him. "Safe? You think soldiers won't come?" "You think they won't burn your home too when they find out?" Her words hit like a slap. Caleb didn't answer. He stared into the fire, Remembering other nights, villages burning, officers shouting orders, his own hands shaking as he reloaded his rifle. He'd followed commands then, believing he was doing right. But now, looking at these two faces, one fierce, one fragile, he wondered what right had ever been in it. At dawn, the sound of hooves broke the silence. Caleb stiffened, moving to the window. Through the thin morning fog, he saw 3 riders, soldiers, their blue coats dark with mud, heading up the trail. His stomach clenched. He turned quickly back to the sisters. "Get in the loft," he whispered. "Now!" Naya hesitated, eyes narrowing, but he grabbed his hat and said sharply, "Go!" They moved without another word, climbing silently up the wooden ladder just as the soldiers rode into view. Caleb stepped outside, trying to look calm, his rifle slung loosely in one hand. "Mornin', Turner," one of them called. "You seen any Injuns pass this way?" Caleb shook his head. "Ain't seen a soul since the storm." The soldiers lingered a moment, scanning the ranch, then rode on. Caleb stood there until their shapes vanished over the ridge. When he returned inside, he exhaled deeply, running a hand through his hair. From the loft above, he heard a soft whisper, Tala asking if it was over. Then Naya's quiet reply, "For now." Caleb stared at the fire again, knowing he had just lied to his own kind for the first time in years, and that it wouldn't be the last. The days that followed were a strange test of endurance and trust. The storm had washed the world clean, but its aftermath left the air tense and uncertain. Caleb Turner found himself sharing his quiet cabin with the 2 Apache sisters, an act that could hang him if the wrong man ever found out. Each day felt like standing on the edge of a knife, the law on one side and conscience on the other. He gave them space at first. The cabin wasn't large. A single room divided by a rough curtain where he slept on one side and the sisters on the other. During the day, they helped with chores, fetching water, hanging laundry, grinding corn. He hadn't asked them to, but Naya was too proud to accept charity. She moved like someone who carried both strength and grief in her bones. Tala, in contrast, was soft-spoken and curious, her youth flickering through even in sorrow. She would follow Caleb around the yard asking shy questions about the cattle, the tools, the sky. "You always alone here?" she asked one morning, her voice barely above the wind. Caleb adjusted the saddle on his horse. "Always," he said simply. "Why?" He didn't answer. How could he explain the loneliness he'd chosen? How could he confess that he'd run from his own kind because he couldn't bear to be one of them anymore? It was that night when Tala's cough began. At first it was soft, just a tickle in her chest. But by the second night, her breathing grew shallow, her skin flushed with fever. Caleb sat by the fire, watching helplessly as Naya tried to cool her sister's face with a damp cloth. "She needs medicine," Naya said, her voice trembling for the first time since they'd met. "Something to stop the fire inside her." Caleb hesitated. The nearest town was 2 days' ride. The soldiers who'd passed before might still be patrolling nearby. If anyone asked questions, if anyone followed him back, it would be over. But then he looked at Tala, her thin frame shaking, her eyes half closed, and the decision made itself. He grabbed his coat and rifle. "I'll go," Naya's head snapped up. "You'll be caught." "I've been caught before," he said with a tired half-smile. Didn't stick. For 2 days, Caleb rode through the desert, sleeping under mesquite trees, drinking from muddy streams. The town of Dry Creek was small, a single street of wooden buildings half swallowed by dust. He walked into the general store like any rancher buying supplies, though his heart pounded every time someone looked too long. He bought quinine powder, willow bark, and a tin of molasses to hide the taste. "Bad fever?" the storekeeper asked casually. "Horse took sick," Caleb replied. "Figure I'll try it on him." When he finally returned home, his lips were cracked from the wind, and his body ached. Naya met him at the door, eyes wide with worry and relief. He handed her the small pouch without a word. She took it like it was made of gold. For the next 2 nights, he helped her tend to Tala, spooning medicine into the girl's mouth, wiping her brow. Slowly, the fever broke. The morning Tala opened her eyes and whispered, "I'm hungry." Naya broke down in silent tears. That evening, when Caleb stepped outside to check the corral, he found Naya waiting. The setting sun painted her face in red and gold. For once, she wasn't guarded. "You could have left us," she said quietly. "You could have told the soldiers." "But you didn't." Caleb looked at her, the ache in his chest sharp as a blade. "I done enough wrong in my life. Maybe this don't make it right, but it's something." She nodded, studying him with unreadable eyes. "Maybe the spirits sent you," she murmured. He didn't know about spirits. But as the night settled in and the desert turned silver under the moon, Caleb felt a strange peace he hadn't known in years. For the first time, his home wasn't empty, and yet, deep inside, he sensed it couldn't last. Things like this, acts of mercy in a world made of cruelty, always came with a price. The days grew warmer, and the quiet rhythm of life on the ranch began to return, at least on the surface. But beneath that calm, Caleb Turner felt the weight of danger pressing closer with each sunrise. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The two Apache sisters, Naya and Tala, were still hidden on his land, and he knew it was only a matter of time before someone noticed something they shouldn't. Every morning, he rose before dawn, scanning the horizon before letting the sisters step outside. The desert, once his refuge, now felt like a watchful enemy. A single curl of smoke from his chimney could draw eyes. A misplaced track in the mud could end all three of their lives. Tala had grown stronger since her fever broke. She smiled again, helping Caleb feed the livestock and fetch water from the well. Her laughter, soft as bird song, brought an unfamiliar lightness to the lonely ranch. Even Naya's walls began to crack, though she still spoke little. Sometimes he caught her watching him, not with suspicion anymore, but with something deeper. Then one afternoon, the sound of hoofbeats shattered the fragile peace. Caleb stepped out of the barn, hand resting on the butt of his revolver. A man on horseback approached, dust swirling around him. As the rider drew closer, Caleb's stomach tightened. It was Briggs, a name he hadn't heard in years but would never forget. Briggs had once served with him in the cavalry, a big, crude man with a cruel streak. He wore his old hat low, a sneer twisting his mouth as he dismounted. "Well, I'll be damned," Briggs said, spitting into the dirt. "Didn't think I'd find you hiding all the way out here, Turner." Caleb forced a calm he didn't feel. "Ain't hiding, just living." Briggs circled the yard, his eyes sharp, taking in the neatly stacked firewood, the fresh laundry line near the cabin. "Living, huh? Funny. I rode past this way before and never saw smoke coming from your chimney. Now, suddenly, looks like a whole family moved in." Caleb's heart pounded. He kept his expression steady. "Got some hands helping me with the spring work." "Hands, huh?" Briggs grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "Wouldn't happen to be Apache hands, would it?" Caleb's blood ran cold. "What are you getting at?" Briggs leaned in, lowering his voice. "Word's out. 2 Indian girls escaped a scalp raid near San Pedro. Soldiers are paying $50 for information. 50 more if you bring their bodies." He paused, watching Caleb's face closely. "Now, I ain't saying you'd be fool enough to harbor savages, but if you were, well, that'd be a mighty dangerous game. Maybe I ought to have a look inside that cabin of yours." Caleb stepped between him and the door. "Ain't nothing in there for you to see." The two men locked eyes, the air thick with threat. Briggs smirked. "Easy now, soldier. I ain't here to make trouble. Not if we come to an understanding." "What kind of understanding?" Briggs's tone turned oily. "You pay me, say, $20 a week. I forget what I saw." "You keep your secrets, I keep mine." Caleb's jaw tightened. $20 was half his month's income. And worse, it meant slavery to a man like Briggs. "Get off my land," Caleb said flatly. Briggs's grin vanished. He swung into his saddle, glaring down at him. "You always were a fool for lost causes, Turner. Don't worry, I'll be back. Maybe I'll bring the boys next time." As his horse disappeared into the shimmering heat, Caleb stood motionless, fists clenched. He knew what that promise meant. Briggs would return, and not alone. That night, as he told Naya what had happened, she didn't flinch. "Then we'll be ready," she said simply. Her eyes burned with quiet fire. "My people have hidden before." Caleb nodded, but inside he felt the weight of what was coming. He had protected them this far, but soon, protection wouldn't be enough. The sun dipped low behind the ridges, turning the Arizona sky into a sea of molten gold and scarlet. Caleb Turner stood on the porch, rifle in hand, watching the desert beyond his ranch shift into shadow. He knew they were coming. He'd known it from the moment Briggs rode away with that smug grin. The man was a vulture, and vultures never came alone. Inside, Naya was packing what little they owned into a bundle: dried meat, cornmeal, a few canteens. Tala, her face pale but steady, sat near the hearth, clutching a blanket. Caleb could see the fear in her eyes even though she tried to hide it. "How long?" Naya asked quietly. "Soon," Caleb replied. "They'll wait till dark. Easier to kill a man when the shadows hide your face." Naya's hands froze on the bundle. "You should run." He shook his head. "They won't stop if I do." "They'll burn this place down and drag you both back to town. Or worse." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of hooves. Caleb felt his stomach tighten. He moved to the window, watching the distant flicker of torches weaving through the darkness. 3, maybe 4 riders. Briggs and his bounty man. He turned to Naya. "Take your sister. Go out the back, follow the dry creek bed south till it forks. Hide there till it's quiet." She didn't move. "And you?" "I'll keep them busy." "No." The word came out fierce, sharp as flint. "We stay." He met her gaze, those dark, defiant eyes that had once glared at him in hatred. Now they burned with something else. Courage. "All right," he said after a moment. "But stay low. No matter what happens." The first shot shattered the stillness. The window beside him exploded, glass spraying across the room. Caleb dove to the side, returning fire through the darkness. The rifle kicked hard against his shoulder. Somewhere outside, a man cursed. "Come out, Turner!" Briggs's voice roared across the yard. "Ain't no use hiding. You can't protect them savages forever." Caleb ducked behind the doorway, breathing hard. He could see Briggs's torchlight moving closer, 3 silhouettes fanning out. He fired again, hitting one square in the chest. The man dropped with a strangled cry. Then came the sound of boots pounding on the porch. Briggs's men kicked open the door, and the night erupted in fire and smoke. Caleb's rifle barked, Naya's bow twanged from behind the table, and Tala screamed as splinters flew through the air. The fight was chaos, gunfire flashing, bodies colliding, the acrid smell of powder filling the room. Caleb took a shot to the shoulder, the pain burning through him like lightning. He staggered but stayed on his feet. Briggs burst through the doorway, grinning like a wolf, pistol raised. "Should have taken my deal," he snarled. Caleb swung his rifle up and fired. The blast hit Briggs square in the chest, throwing him backward into the dirt. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of fire. Briggs's dropped torch had caught the curtains. "Caleb!" Naya shouted, rushing to him as he sank to his knees. The flames climbed fast, licking the walls, devouring the small home he'd built with his hands. She grabbed his arm, hauling him up. "We have to go!" Together they stumbled out into the night. Behind them, the cabin burned bright against the desert sky, flames roaring high enough to light the distant mesas. Caleb leaned against the fence post, blood soaking his shirt, the world spinning around him. Tala clung to Naya, sobbing quietly. Naya turned to look at Caleb, her face streaked with soot and tears. "You saved us," she whispered. He managed a faint smile, though pain clouded his eyes. "Ain't over yet." In the distance, thunder rolled again, not from the sky this time, but from the pounding of soldiers' hooves echoing across the plains. The fight had been won, but the war for their lives had only begun. And as the fire devoured his home, Caleb realized he had finally burned away the last of his guilt. Only blood and truth remained. The desert night was cruel and cold. The cabin behind them had collapsed into a heap of smoldering ash, flames still licking at what had once been Caleb Turner's home. The glow lit their faces as they stood at the edge of the dry creek bed, breathless and covered in dust and blood. Caleb leaned heavily against Naya's arm, his left shoulder wrapped in a strip of torn fabric. Every movement sent fire through his body, but he said nothing. The ranch was gone. There was nothing left to stay for. They had to move. "South," Caleb whispered hoarsely. "If we can make the canyon by sunrise, we'll lose him in the rocks." Naya nodded, her jaw set. Tala, still trembling from the fight, clung to her sister's hand but kept pace. Behind them, The wind carried the faint echo of approaching horses. Soldiers. They didn't have long. The trio trudged through the night, guided only by the stars and the faint silver of moonlight. The desert stretched endless and empty, each step crunching over sand and stone. Caleb's blood dripped steadily onto the earth. Leaving a dark trail, he tried to hide by brushing it away with his boot. But it was no use. He was fading. After hours of silence, Tala finally spoke. "Why do they hate us?" Her voice cracked, small and lost against the vast dark. Caleb's breath came ragged. "Because they don't understand you," he said quietly. "And what men don't understand, they try to destroy." Naya glanced at him, her face shadowed beneath her hood. "You were one of them," she said. He didn't deny it. "I was," he replied. "And I can't change what I did. But I can change what I do now," they walked on. By dawn, the horizon bled orange, and the heat began to rise again. The desert was merciless in daylight. No shade, no mercy. The wind had died, and the silence pressed against them like a weight. Caleb stumbled once, then again. Finally, his legs gave way, and he sank to his knees. "Go!" he rasped. "Leave me. You'll move faster." Naya knelt beside him instantly. "No," she said fiercely. "You brought us this far. We don't leave our own." He looked at her, dazed by the pain and the sun. "I ain't your own, Naya." Her eyes softened for the first time. "Maybe you are now." With Tala's help, she managed to haul him up onto the wagon they had salvaged, a broken-down old thing that groaned with every turn of the wheels. They moved slowly, the mule straining under the weight, until the ground began to change, rocky cliffs rising like sentinels on either side. The air grew cooler. They were nearing the canyons. By midday, Caleb was barely conscious. His shirt was soaked through with blood and sweat, his face pale as bone. He drifted in and out of awareness, the world blurring between light and shadow. Sometimes he saw faces from his past, his captain shouting orders, the village aflame, a woman's cry in the dark. Then Naya's voice would pull him back, firm and steady. "Stay with us, Turner. Just a little farther." When they finally reached a narrow ravine, Naya stopped the wagon. The place was hidden, a labyrinth of stone and shadow where even sound seemed afraid to travel. She helped Caleb down and laid him beneath an overhang. Tala fetched what little water they had left, pressing the cup to his lips. As the evening sun dipped low again, painting the cliffs in red and gold, Caleb stirred weakly. "Never thought I'd end up here," he murmured. "Where?" Naya asked. "Running from soldiers instead of riding with them." She gave a faint smile. "Now you understand what it means to be hunted." He looked at her, really looked at her, and nodded. "Yeah, I reckon I do." That night, the desert wind whispered through the canyon like a lullaby. Caleb drifted into uneasy sleep beside the two sisters he'd risked everything for. The stars above burned cold and distant, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel entirely alone. The desert had taken everything from him, but in return, it had given him something rare and precious. A chance at redemption, bought with blood and bound by loyalty by dawn the next day. The canyon walls rose high around them, tall, red, and weathered like the faces of ancient gods. The air was cool, and the sound of distant water echoed faintly, a promise of life in the middle of an unforgiving desert. Naya led the mule through the narrow passage with Tala close behind, while Caleb slumped against the wagon, pale and silent. His wound had darkened overnight, the bandage soaked through. Every jolt of the wheels drew a low groan from his throat. Naya's heart tightened each time she heard him. For days now he had carried them, fought for them, bled for them. She had seen brave men before, but not like this. Not one who had turned against his own kind to protect hers. Still, she didn't know if she could trust what he represented. He was a man caught between two worlds, and that made him dangerous, but also human. At last, the narrow canyon opened into a hidden valley. Below them, shaded by cottonwoods, lay a cluster of small shelters built from stone and brush. A thin column of smoke rose from a fire pit, curling into the morning air. It was the kind of place only those who belonged to the land could find. Tala gasped softly. "People," she whispered. Naya nodded, gripping her hand. "Our people." As they descended, figures emerged from the shadows, men and women dressed in buckskin, faces marked by dust and caution. Among them stood an older man with streaks of gray in his hair and eyes that had seen too much. When Naya saw him, her breath caught. "Uncle," she said softly. Chief Dasan stepped forward, disbelief and relief warring on his weathered face. He reached for her, touching her shoulder as if afraid she might vanish. "Naya, Tala," his voice cracked. "We thought you were dead," she shook her head. "We would have been, if not for him." She turned to where Caleb still sat slumped in the wagon, his head bowed. "He saved us." At the sight of the white man, the gathered Apaches stiffened. A murmur spread through them, low and sharp. Several men raised their weapons. Chief Dasan's expression hardened. "You brought one of them here?" "He fought his own to protect us," Naya said firmly. "He could have turned us in, but he didn't. He killed the bounty men who came for us." Dasan's gaze lingered on Caleb, measuring him with the weight of history. Slowly he approached. "Why?" he asked in rough English. "Why would a white soldier betray his kind for 2 Apache girls?" Caleb lifted his head weakly, meeting the man's eyes. "Because I owed a debt," he said. "To more souls than I can name." Dasan studied him in silence, then turned to his people. "He is wounded," Naya said quickly. "He'll die without help." The chief's eyes softened just slightly. "You trust him that much?" "I do," she said simply. Dasan nodded once, then gestured to 2 of his men. "Bring him. But if he betrays us, it will be your word that burns with his." The men carried Caleb to one of the shelters and laid him on a bed of woven mats. Naya stayed by his side, grinding herbs for a poultice while Tala fetched water. The hours passed slowly as she cleaned the wound and pressed the medicine into it. Caleb's breathing steadied, though he remained half-conscious, whispering fragments of memory, names of soldiers, a burning village, the smell of smoke. Outside, the Apache camp moved cautiously around the newcomers. Children peered curiously from behind their mothers, while the elders muttered prayers to the spirits for protection. When night fell, the firelight painted the canyon in gold and shadow. Dasan sat beside Naya, watching the flames dance. "You've done something dangerous, child," he said. "The spirits may forgive him. But will the world?" Naya looked toward Caleb's still form, his face peaceful at last. "The world already took everything from us," she said quietly. "Maybe it's time we make our own forgiveness." Dasan gave a small, knowing smile, then rose and left her there, alone with the sound of the fire and the slow, steady breathing of the man who had crossed every line to save them. In that moment, for the first time since her village burned, Naya allowed herself to believe that perhaps the desert could still give life, not just take it away. For 3 days, the hidden Apache camp tended to Caleb Turner. Fever racked his body, and he drifted between delirium and sleep. Naya never left his side. She bathed his wounds, whispered old healing songs her mother once sang, and pressed cool water to his brow. Tala slept curled nearby, exhausted but safe. Outside the shelter, life moved cautiously on. Hunters came and went, smoke from cooking fires curled into the dusk, but tension hummed beneath every heartbeat. A white man in an Apache sanctuary was a dangerous thing. By the 4th dawn, Caleb opened his eyes fully. The fire had burned low, and soft light seeped through the cracks in the shelter wall. His throat was dry as bone. "You stayed," he croaked. Naya turned to him, relief softening her stern expression. "You would have died without someone to watch you." He managed a faint smile. "You don't give up easy, do you?" She looked away, pretending to adjust the bandage on his arm. "We've all had to learn that," she said quietly. Outside, voices rose, the sharp call of a scout returning from patrol. Moments later, Chief Dasan entered the shelter, his expression grim. "Soldiers," he said. "Riders seen heading this way, maybe 20 men." Caleb sat up despite the pain. "They're tracking me," he said. "And maybe you too. My old company doesn't forgive deserters." Dasan studied him. "If they find us, they'll destroy everything we've built here." "You brought death to our door." Naya stepped forward. "He didn't mean to. He saved us." "That doesn't matter." Dasan said. The world will not listen to reasons. It will only see who we are. The air in the shelter grew heavy. Caleb met Dasan's eyes. Then I'll lead them away, he said. They're after me, not your people. Naya's eyes widened. You're still too weak to stand, let alone fight. He gave a bitter laugh. Guess I'll have to learn quick. Dasan's jaw tightened, torn between suspicion and reluctant respect. Finally, he nodded. If you do this, you may buy us time to flee. But if you return, it will be as one of us, or not at all. Caleb understood. There would be no going back. That night, he prepared in silence. Naya helped him rebind his wounds and handed him a bow and a knife, Apache weapons, light and quick. If you go out there, you'll die, she said softly. Maybe, he replied. But not running feels worse. She hesitated, then pressed a small leather charm into his hand. For protection, she said. My mother made it. He closed his fingers around it, his throat too tight for words. By dawn, the camp was stirring. Tala clung to Naya's skirt as they watched Caleb mount one of the tribe's horses. The sun painted the canyon walls gold, the air sharp with coming heat. He looked back only once, at Naya, standing tall and fierce against the wind. Their eyes met, an unspoken promise passing between them. Then he rode out. The desert opened before him like a sea of fire and dust. The soldiers would be close by now, tracking his blood and boot prints, following the same instincts he once used to hunt others. But this time he knew the land better. The Apache had taught him how to listen, to the wind, to the silence between heartbeats. He rode in wide circles, scattering tracks, leading his pursuers deep into the maze of canyons. By midday, the first shots echoed. Caleb returned fire from the cliffs, his aim true despite the shaking in his arm. The soldiers spread out, shouting his name, promising mercy if he surrendered. He laughed bitterly. Mercy had no place out here. Hours passed. When the dust finally settled, the sun was sinking, and only Caleb's silhouette remained on the ridge, still, silent, unmoving. Far in the canyon below, Naya and Tala watched the sky turn crimson. They didn't know if he was alive or dead, but they prayed to the spirits that he had found his peace. And though the wind carried no answer, it felt for a fleeting moment as if the desert itself bowed in silence for the man who had crossed every boundary to protect two sisters who had once been his enemies. The sun rose over the canyon, spilling golden light across the red rock walls. Smoke from distant gunfire had faded into the dawn, but the silence it left behind was heavier than any noise. Naya stood at the mouth of the ravine, her shawl drawn tightly around her shoulders, eyes fixed on the horizon. She hadn't slept. Every shadow in the night had looked like him. Every gust of wind had sounded like his voice. But now the desert was still. Tala came up beside her, clutching a small bundle of dried herbs. "Do you think he'll come back?" the girl asked softly. Naya's voice wavered. "The spirits guide the brave. If he walks still, they'll bring him home." Behind them, the Apache camp was preparing to move. Chief Dasan had decided they could not stay, not after the soldiers had come so close. The tribe was packing what little they could carry, woven baskets, tools, water skins. The children moved quietly, sensing the weight of the morning. As Naya turned to help, a call echoed from the canyon rim. A scout appeared, leading a horse. Slumped across its back was a man. Her heart stopped. Naya ran, her legs burning as she climbed the rocky slope. When she reached the horse, she saw him, Caleb Turner, bloodied, dust-covered, but alive. His face was pale beneath the layer of grime, his breath shallow but steady. The soldier's trail had ended miles back. He had found his way home. With the help of the scout, Naya eased him down, her hands trembling. "You stubborn fool," she whispered. "You found us." Caleb's cracked lips twitched into a faint smile. "Told you I'd be back. Couldn't let you girls get in trouble without me." Tears stung her eyes. "You should rest." "You've done enough." "Not yet," he rasped. He looked toward Dasan, who had approached with quiet steps. "They won't follow anymore," Caleb said. "They're gone." The chief regarded him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "You've kept your word," he said. "You have bought us time, and honor. Caleb's eyes fluttered shut, exhaustion overtaking him. Naya stayed beside him until his breathing steadied. When he awoke again, it was evening. The tribe had moved into the deeper valleys, farther from danger. Fires flickered around the new camp, and children laughed softly in the distance. For the first time in months, peace settled over the land like a blessing. Caleb sat propped against a rock, wrapped in a blanket. Naya knelt beside him, grinding corn in a small stone bowl. "You saved them?" she said quietly. He shook his head. "No, you all saved me." They sat in silence for a while, the night air cool and filled with the hum of crickets. Finally, Caleb spoke again. "I used to think a man's worth came from what he could build or destroy, but maybe it's just what he's willing to protect." Naya looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You protected us," she said, "and for that your spirit will walk with ours." He smiled faintly. "That mean I'm one of you now?" She hesitated, then nodded. "You've earned it." As the stars spread across the sky, Caleb leaned back and gazed upward. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and smoke, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, a song of life continuing even after loss. He thought of the man he once was, a soldier, a rancher, a wanderer, and realized that somewhere between guilt and grace, he had found his purpose. Days turned into weeks. His wounds healed slowly. He learned the Apache tongue, their songs, their ways of reading the wind. The tribe no longer looked at him with suspicion, but with quiet respect. When he rode with them on hunts or stood beside Dasan at council, it was as though he had always been meant to be there. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, he would look east, toward the empty plains where the soldiers once rode, and whisper a prayer for the dead, for the lost, for all the souls caught between worlds. He had faced a fate he never saw coming. Not death, but redemption, and in that wild, sacred land. Beneath the eternal desert sky, Caleb Turner, the man who once hunted the Apache, lived out his days as one of them. A guardian, a brother, and a bridge between two worlds that had once been enemies, now bound by his courage and the quiet mercy of fate.